Okay, everyone, good afternoon, good morning, good whatever time of day it is that you are watching this. So, before we get started, before we get into the notes, here's what you should have. So, when you look at your um, desk right in front of you, you should have your computer up, you should be listening, you should have both of those sheets glued into your notebook, you should have a pen or a pencil ready, okay? If you look down at the bottom right here, if you see a star, right, what that star is telling you is that you should write down the information on that slide, okay? You may need to pause if you can't get all the information down. You may need to pause. I'm obviously not going to give you guys pauses just to write, to skip through. But if I get through explaining something, you need to pause to write everything down. That is something that you should do. Okay, so let's get started. So, what we are going to be doing and what we are going to be working on writing is an obituary, right? So, what is an obituary? So, an obituary is a news report that informs the public about a recent death, right? So, lots of times these are in newspapers or magazines, but an obituary is anything that informs the public about a death. So, old school again, lots of times in newspapers. We see them in magazines. Now, obviously, more online settings, but there's something that still happens. So, again, that obituary is anything that's written about a person, right? Something that's written about a person after they die, and this leads in perfectly to what we're going to talk about next, right? And that is, what is the purpose? So, for that last one, pause if you need to. Pause this one if you want to write this one down. So the purpose of an obituary is number one. In some cases, especially back in older times, where news might not have traveled as fast, things weren't as instantaneous, right? An obituary was a way to announce that a person had died, right? Now, what we see a lot more is this second part, where we talk about the legacy of a person or their accomplishments. So now, an obituary is kind of a remembrance of a person, right? After they die, right? It's talking about their legacy, their accomplishments, the things they have accomplished in their life, and the things that they have done. So those are their two big purposes, right? Number one, to inform someone that people has died, that a person has died, right? And number two, to talk about their legacy of that person. And if you want to write down what's in here, right on your sheet, that's perfect. If you need to pause, then go ahead and pause. Okay, so what do obituaries normally include? So normally they include the time and the cause of the death, right? Just kind of a general overview to know what happened to the person, when it was, what date it was, in certain situations, how that person died, and you don't have to get into like gruesome specific details, right? But kind of a general idea. Kind of an overview of their life, right? A brief description, talking about their early life, right? Where they lived, where they were born, their childhood, adolescence, right? The things that they had, the things that they did growing up. Um, the next thing is their accomplishments in life, right? What they did, their education, their occupations, right? Any awards, right? Any things that they did in their lives, right? That were notable, right? That were notable. So yeah. A brief section on what the person was like, their personalities, their hobbies, their interests, right? How they treat others, kind of who they are as a person, what they like doing. And I have a round character here because when we get to what we're going to do, right, this is where you guys are going to kind of round out those characters, right? And then finally, their legacy, how people will remember them, right? What is that impact that person had, right? What is the impact that they had? And this again kind of ties into our static versus dynamic characters when we talk about that. So I just kind of put that in as a little bit of a reminder. Okay, so those are the things: time and cause of death, brief description of their life, their accomplishments, what the person was like. Right? If you met that person in real life, what would that person be like? And their legacy, or how will people remember them? So our tone and diction, right? So our diction is going to be formal. Again, it's more of a published piece of work, and again, that formal tone keeps things a little bit more respectful, I think, right? In our sorry, scratch what I just said. Our formal diction. So again, diction are the words that are used. I held myself. I'm sorry if that was confusing. Backtrack. Ignore what I said. So the formal diction, right? Formal word choice, right, is what we want to have. Our tone should also be a little more formal and respectful. And the part that I have here is it should match the personality of the deceased person. A deceased person is the person who's passed away, right? But sometimes, in certain cases, right, if the person was a funnier person, then the obituary might have a lighter tone, right? If the person was more serious, it might be more serious. But it should be like one of those things that whoever it's written for, if they were able to read it, that they would really kind of understand, right? Understand it and like it, and it would kind of match who they are, right? It should always be respectful, right? It should always be respectful, but it should have some of the person's personality. You should be able to see that through your tone, right? Formal diction, word choice, sorry if I got that confused for you, and then respectful tone. So let's move on to our next step. So we have our overview of what an obituary is now. So what you are going to be doing is you're going to be writing your own obituary for a character in The Outsiders. So you have two kind of big options for this, right? Option number one is you're going to write an obituary for a character that died during the story of The Outsiders, right? We have a few people to choose from in that regard, right? But you're going to write about them, right? Option number two is to write about a character, right, that survives through The Outsiders, right, but you are projecting what the rest of their life would have looked like. So in both of these options, depending on who it is, when you look through and see some of those things that you need to include from our notes, right, when we're talking about those things that are things that you may have to kind of make up yourself. So those may not be in the book, and that's okay. It's your job. You have the creative license, the creative freedom. I'm giving you those things, that ability to kind of write in your own things, right? So it may not talk about, 2-bit, right? It may not talk about all of his hobbies and interests, right? So you have to kind of assume, right, what would some hobbies and interests that would fit his personality be, okay? So for this, either option, one thing that I want you to know is that you're going to have to kind of fill in some of those details yourself, right? If it's someone if you're choosing someone who dies during it, you're going to have more of a complete picture. If you choose option two for someone who survives and you're projecting what their life was like after, that is going to fall on you kind of in a creative sense where you're using some creative writing skills, but you're also kind of taking what you know about that character to making some choices that make sense, right? Let's say you choose, Pony Boy, right? And you just say, I'm trying to think of something crazy. He becomes, the leader of a circus, right? He becomes a circus trainer, right? That seems out there, and if you're going to choose that, you have to kind of make sure that connects to his life somehow, right? Cool. Second part, how will you be graded? Right, so professionalism points, right? So you need to include all of the necessary elements from our obituary. So those elements that we wrote down, took notes on, those I want to see each of those things. And to help you with that, I have a template, and we'll talk about this in 1 minute, in Google Classroom that has all of those things in it, right? So you just need to kind of fill those things out. Our learning targets. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be tying this in to dynamic and to static characters, right? So as well as making some characters that may be flat, right? Adding them, making them more round, or if you chose a character that is more rounded, making sure you include those details, right, that shows that they're a round character. Remember, static and dynamic, if you want to flip back to review, right, that talks about change, right? Round and flat talks about how complex they are. So to give you a little bit of a kind of helpful thing, I had a student example with very few tweaks that I gave to you guys as an example of something that you could look at and to use. So when I'm talking about, can I see whether the character is dynamic or static, right, this is what I'm talking about. Not until one night when Johnny died, the only thing that Dally loved was gone. Dally lost his mind. Right, so that does, right, that person is showing a change in the character. Now, here's what I'll say about that. That's a good start For me, I would want you to make it a little bit clearer and a little bit more specific than what's right there. But that's a good start, and that's what I'm talking about in your obituary, kind of showing how that person changed. Or if you pick certain people, maybe they stay the same in some ways after it, right? So whether you want to show that they change, whether you want to show that they stay the same, that is something that you're going to need to do. And again, going back to that, who you pick is going to have a big impact on this. So if you pick a character that dies during the course of the story, right, you're not going to, you're basically going to be kind of showing through the events of the story how they change. If you pick someone that survives, right, you kind of want to take those events of the story as your starting point, and then from there kind of work and think about how those things would change, okay? So, ignore this on the top. This should say round versus flat. Round versus flat. This should say round versus flat. This is a typo here. Let me fix this as we go. Look at this. Technology, everyone. Round versus flat. So, again, student example, not perfect. We have a savage who YOLO'd everything, which is not a good example of formal diction. So this example isn't perfect, and that's okay. That's okay. It's good sometimes to see that everyone's not perfect, right? But this is a good way to show that Dally is a round character, right? We have him as being a nuisance on one hand, but being really caring and, you know, loving his friends, right? And that's kind of the example of someone that is more of a complex character, more of a complex person. That is kind of what you need and what you should be kind of looking for and going for with that. Okay, so for those last two, those are some good examples of kind of how to show round versus flat and what I'm going to be looking for. Again, don't forget in that professionalism part, there's also a part for spelling and grammar and tone and diction, so make sure those are on point. Okay? Okay, now what you should do now. So head back to Google Classroom. On the same post where you see this video, there's also going to be an obituary template. That template's going to have kind of directions filled in for you, on what to do. So get there, start working. If you still have questions, that is okay. Here's what I want you to do. So if you're confused about part of it, you can push that part off. Work on the parts that you understand and you think you can do. Tomorrow, I'll be back. You can talk to me. We can get things figured out. But tomorrow you can ask those questions. So I understand that this isn't perfect. This is a video. You can't really ask me any questions, right away. But if you have questions and I missed something or whatever, or you're confused about something, do the parts that make sense to you. And then tomorrow you can ask me some questions, okay? Our due date for this is going to be Wednesday. If you need any of these directions, I have attached, and that's the same post, right? The same post. I've attached all that stuff that you need with our directions, this video, as well as our template, okay? So have a wonderful day. Make sure we are being extra kind to our guest teacher. And let's be productive today, even though I'm not here. Awesome. That's all I have. Thank you very much.